Dear Pia, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, first of all, I have to say that it's a big honor and privilege to be here. So thank you so much for the invitation. So I have a presentation, which I will use as well. I have to tell you that I came here directly from Kiev, Ukraine, and want to tell you that, of course, Iceland is absolutely fascinating. It's such a beautiful country with rich history, and although the country is not big, it has something to teach to the whole world when it comes to democracy. And I'm talking about the oldest parliament in the world, Althing. Is that correct pronunciation? Althing, yes. Probably in this sense, we have something in common with Iceland. Until recently, for many, Ukraine was this unfamiliar dot on the world map. Today, it's a synonymous of a struggle for democracy and self-determination of people. Something that we probably took for granted after the end of the World War II, that we perceived as a, if you want, an academic or bureaucratic dimension of our life in peaceful Europe. Unexpectedly, we realized for ourselves that democracy today requires a price of people's lives. You may think that maybe it's in the neighborhood of authoritarian regime, but let me stress it, that this neighborhood is not territorial. This neighborhood today is ideological. The danger comes not from the border that divides you, but from the different values that divides you. Iceland is very beautiful, but so is Ukraine. Can I ask you to raise your hands who have been to Ukraine? Oh, so many people actually. To be honest, I'm quite surprised. But for those who haven't been to Ukraine yet, the invitation is standing, but take it my word that Ukraine is also very beautiful, a very European state, very dynamic, fashionable if you want, very tasty country with a lot of things to see. We have mountains and seas and even desert. We have taste for life, and we have the tastiest coffee shops in Ukraine, I believe. Maybe it will surprise me during the coffee shop. Also, I will choose one more adjective to describe my country, which neither I nor many of my compatriots knew about ourselves until February 24, 2022, when the full-scale invasion began. It's a country of brave people. Here is some stories that I want to share with you. This is my president. He stayed in Ukraine when he was offered a ride, and he said, thank you, when he was offered the evacuation after this full-scale invasion, and he said, I don't need a ride, I need an ammunition. He stayed and continued the battle, and I think it was a very brave move of a leader. People against tanks, people were stopping the tanks with their own bodies in the beginning of the war. They believed that they can appeal to the feelings, emotions, or racial wisdom to those who have been sitting in the tanks and who attacked the peaceful city. Of course, it didn't stop them. Our brave volunteers who, at the expense of their lives and health, were trying to save the pets, the animals around the Ukraine, which also needed help and support. Of course, brave people who haven't been trained to be soldiers. These are singers and poets and politicians and, I don't know, architects and whatever. They had to take the arms in their hands and to go to the front because they have nowhere to retreat. Because in the rear are our homes and our children. Russia attacked Ukraine and started an unprovoked brutal war, demonstrating its strength and expecting the weakness of Ukraine and the democratic West. Ukrainian people didn't give up. So does the democratic West. To the surprise of the whole world, of course. However, the help came probably more slowly and less decisively than we expected. You know, Björk has this song, Icelandic singer, that there's no logic to human behavior. If my husband was sitting in the room, he would say, please don't sing. I'm not going to sing. But this song goes like, there's no logic to human behavior and can be confusing and can be surprising. And I think that the human behavior of Ukrainians really surprised many people in this world, including ourselves. Now I want to tell you actually what's happening in Ukraine right now. So here is the slide. Do you know much about ballistic missiles? Neither do I. I'm not an expert. But what I know, when these things is coming into the skies of my city, the whole 4 million city Kyiv is shaken and the windows in my apartment also trembling. Kinzhal is a Russian missile capable of carrying a nuclear charge, which was put into the service of Russian arsenal only in 2018. This is an aeroballistic missile. So at the moment of impact, it goes to the target with the right angle, and it develops a speed of 12,500 kilometers. It's more than 2,000 kilometers. So I checked it out. It's within the range of any European city, city on the European continent. Russia claimed that it cannot be, and the whole world assumed that it cannot be shut down. Ukrainians, armed with American anti-missile systems, Patriots, proved it to be wrong. We managed to shut it down. So this Monday, just a few days before I came here, when I was drying my hair and my 15-month-old baby was eating breakfast, 2 of these things came to Kyiv. Thankfully, they were shut down. Kyiv's got lucky. Many cities in Ukraine are not lucky, especially those that are very close to the borders with Russia or close to the contact line. Russia is erasing many cities from the face of the earth. This is not a slide from some apocalyptic horror film. This is a town city called Marinka, which when I was a member of parliament just a few years ago, visited a school for children excursion somewhere. This is another city, Mariupol, one of the most prosperous cities in the eastern part of Ukraine, which has its own port, which was exporting lots of grain and steel and other important resources to the many countries in the world. Not anymore, unfortunately. Let me give you a few important numbers about Russia war. Today, Russia occupies 5 regions of Ukraine and Crimean Peninsula, and it's approximately 1/5 of Ukrainian territory, which equals to more than 120,000 square kilometers. I checked it out. It's more than Iceland itself. About 30% of our territory, 170,000 kilometers, contaminated with unexploded mines. About 6 million people are refugees. They left their Ukraine. More than 10,000 people, civilians, are wounded. More than 10,000 civilians that have been killed, and 20,000 are wounded. It doesn't count, it doesn't include the victims, amongst military. The country, the state doesn't disclose it from a security considerations. More than 2,000 children are gone missing. It's a famous report, for example, of Financial Times, that Ukrainian children have been deported from Ukrainian territories by Russia, by war criminal Putin. They have been taken their names away, and they have been given to the adoption on Russian territory. Something that is like just difficult to imagine that it can happen in the heart of Europe today. It's happening today. Thankfully, International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for Putin himself, and justly so. You know also that closer to winter, I cannot not mention it, but 50% of our energy infrastructure have been destroyed. It's going to be a very tough winter for millions of Ukrainians in my country. At the same time, despite this brutal war, 2 years of this brutal war, I think that we should say that Ukraine has not reconciled with its victim role. We have had a lot of achievements in this war and lots of gains, a lot of successes. We hold the fight together with the international partner, and I want to mention some of them. This is a very famous drawing, painting. It happened in the very beginning of the war when an island, Zmiyny, it's called Zmiyny Island, have been challenged by the Russian warship, and they appealed to few soldiers, that were several soldiers that were on that island, that you have to surrender. One of the Ukrainian soldiers said, Russian warship, go and yourself. I cannot use this word. So this is a painting depicting that moment, and this became a symbol of a Ukrainian fight with Russian enemies. And I just want to mention that during this war, Ukrainian managed to deoccupy 40,000 kilometers of occupied area. Militarily, we had successful operations. You know that we deoccupied Kherson and Kharkiv, and we also managed to seize Kursk region in Russia, which will be advantages for Ukraine in the future negotiations. Technologically, Ukraine became a very advanced country. Let me tell you that we are laboratory #1 in the world when it comes to the developments of drone technologies, military technologies. I hope one day, rather sooner than later, we'll use these technologies in the civilian areas. Geopolitically, we also managed to gain, together with you, a lot of good results. I think that applied sanctions and the economic support, financial support, support with the weapon, helped us to hold this fight. Ukraine also became the candidate to get the European Union membership, and we just started the negotiations recently. We also don't give up on our membership within NATO. But this is not enough. And the real question is, what must we do to end this war? What's happening in my country is referred as Russian war in Ukraine. However, I think there are other definitions that are very appropriate to discuss the matters in this room. I believe that this is an attack of the authoritarian world on a democratic world. It's also a global conflict of undeclared coalition of Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, the country soon to become a nuclear holding state, against the European Union, against the European coalition, democratic coalition, which includes European Union, NATO, US, Iceland. Ukraine also belongs to this coalition. It's also a war of global orders, one of which is governed by dictatorship, military force, which is very often, as we see, rattling with its nuclear power. The other world is governed with the rule of law and human rights. Today's world response to Russia, through Russia's war against Ukraine, is not a question how to help Ukraine to control its areas or regain its territories. It's a question, it's a matter of choosing the world order that will dominate the decades to come. This choice is difficult, including the fact that the achievement of just peace and return the respect to the institutional rules and institutional institutions, in my deep conviction, cannot be achieved with the help of the tools that we use to make the better world in the recent decades. Dialogue, like how to build a dialogue with the war criminal Putin. Should we throw into the trash bin the Statute of UN Organization and Declaration for Human Rights? And why do we need such a dialogue? Peaceful negotiations, yes, we do need it. But not based on the surrender of Ukraine's territorial integrity and its right for self-determination. Because by recognizing the rule of power, the rule of force, we will not be able to achieve a stable peace, not only in Ukraine, but in any other conflict around the world. I want to give you 3 suggestions of what can be done today. First, we should change our mindset. Peace is not given. Democracy is fragile and has to be protected. The war in Ukraine is not a territorial conflict between 2 countries. It's a global battle for the world order. We should set the red lines. Until today, it was Putin who set them. He said, sanctions, you apply sanctions to us, we'll go nuclear. You give tanks to Ukraine, we'll go nuclear. You give F-16 to Ukraine, we'll go nuclear. You'll allow Ukraine to use the long-range missiles into the deep Russian territory, we'll go nuclear. None of them was actually, in reality, a red line. I believe that the Western theory of escalation was wrong from the very beginning. By setting the red lines, Putin created a fear which ran the geopolitical response, delaying the volume and speed of the international assistance, of course at the expense of Ukrainian lives and Ukrainian land. I believe if Putin knew that attacking Ukraine is a red line itself, maybe we could have avoided this terrible and brutal war. But of course, the history doesn't know the conditional mood. Today is the moment when we should turn the tables. War can be ended only if Putin understands and will have no choice but to end it. Second suggestion. In order to prevent a bigger war, we must be prepared for the bigger war. It can freak you out, probably, my suggestion, in a very peaceful Reykjavik, a country without its forces, without its army. But in my mind, this is today's reality, which we have to recognize. The recent turbulent events around the world, the fruitful cooperation between the dictators, dictates us that we must build up our strength, that we must arm ourselves, that we must be prepared to protect democracy not only with the words, but with the force if needed. And this is the example of Ukraine. From a practical point of view, it means increasing the military capacity, the military capability, and cooperation among the democratic partners. It means more strategic cooperation and readiness for the military scenarios. It means prevent the competition between the national defense industries. It means improve of military logistics and supply chains between the democratic states. And it means joint public procurement if possible. My last suggestion, help Ukraine. You're already doing it. Iceland does a lot. If you go to the page of the Icelandic government, you can see how explicit, how strong and empathetic your support was. And this is what I've heard also when we went with a lot of people to open this beautiful Tower of Peace, the Yoko Ono Memorial, and I talked to people, and I was amazed how informed you are, and it struck me, it impressed me extremely, very much, which is much appreciated by Ukrainians. But I believe that there are more things to do. With the international support, Ukraine can overcome the adversary in this war. What it means more sanctions, sanctions that when it hurts Russia, and it hurts in energy sphere because there are a lot of still schemes when it comes to, for example, LNG, liquefied natural gas. When it comes to oil, Russia is capable to deliver these resources to many countries in the world without the punishment, which finances the warfare which Russia uses against Ukraine. It means also more weapons, joint production of weapons with Ukraine. There are more weapons around the world that could protect Ukraine, and which is probably not needed by some of the states, and that can protect not only Kyiv but other cities as well. And finally, a fundamental element to the end of this war is security guarantees, our membership in NATO. Yesterday, the mayor of Iceland, the mayor of Reykjavik, when he was opening the Tower of Peace, he said that how beautiful, how amazing it is that we are Reykjavik, a symbol of peace, and imagine our country doesn't have its own army. And I was jealous there, I was standing there and was jealous there, like that, yes, there are these lands, these countries in the world, but I was also asking myself and asking you, why can you enjoy this peace? And one of the answers is not only because you're this small island in the Atlantic that doesn't threaten anyone, because Ukraine doesn't threaten anyone else as well. It didn't have any force to threaten anyone and didn't have that ideas. But because you are a member of NATO, you have this collective umbrella, collective defense umbrella, which protects you. So far in the history of the world, there was not a single case when NATO country has been challenged. And I believe that this is the real solution to stop this war. So to conclude, to end this war is hard. To end this war in a fair way, not only for Ukraine, but also in a fair way for the peace in the whole world, fair way to the international rules, international institutions, is even harder. And it demands a unique leadership. It demands courageous and wise leadership, not only from Ukraine, but also from the international community. There is an Icelandic proverb, Inken verður obbarin biskup, yeah? So in English translated as, no one becomes a bishop unbeaten. And if I read this wisdom right, it means that if you do something great, expect hardship. Ukrainians cannot agree more with this proverb. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Ambassador Hermann Ingólfsson, for joining us. You touched upon, it was a very thought-provoking address that you gave us, and many difficult issues to think about. I think we're just going to dive into this informal discussion, and then hopefully later on we'll have some time for quick questions. So reflect on that if you have any questions for Svitlana or the ambassador. But as you talked about, democracy comes with a price. And defending democracy in times of crisis sometimes requires tough decisions. What have been the biggest challenges for Ukraine in balancing security with protecting democratic freedoms during the war?
So if I speak like this, can you hear me well? Yes? Okay. So, yes, you're absolutely right. When you exist in peaceful reality, you have completely different set of drivers that run your policy, that run your thinking, that run your agenda for the country. But when the war comes, it's all upside down, and you find yourself in a situation that you have to prioritize. And the priorities goes like this: first things first, and first things means to protect life, to protect security. And then everything else become like a secondary. And it can be so, it's so uncomfortable for people in a democratic country, but you have to refuse from many of the rights and many of the freedoms in order to survive, in order to live. And of course, this kind of mode of existence doesn't go without very big sacrifices. So the balance is difficult, and it was difficult for political leadership.
Do you have any examples for us on what kind of sacrifices or had there been any kind of restrictions?
There are a lot of restrictions in Ukraine. So first of all, for example, our men cannot leave the country if they have an age of mobilization kind of age from 18 until 60. They have to stay in the country. They have to take the burden of this war. There are also a lot of restrictions when it comes to things, for example, like with the freedom of speech. You were a journalist, former journalist, right? You were running a TV. I was also a journalist previously in my career, and there is a saying that freedom of speech falls first victim of any of the wars. And that also was something that we understood, that we cannot have the same pluralistic and freedom of speech that we enjoyed. It doesn't mean that we have censorship and there are no free media in Ukraine. That wouldn't be true. But there is a lot of self-censorship when Ukrainians preserve not to talk about certain things because it would undermine our efforts in this war. There is also no political competition as such. Because, you know, political profession is extremely competitive, you know it very well. And one of the side effects of the political competition is that it's dividing the society, it's polarizing the society, if you want, because we are fighting for different things, like right, left, you know, different policies. We cannot be divided at the moment. We cannot discuss of how policy on housing or I don't know, supporting the animals can be this or that, and like kill each other, I mean, metaphorically kill each other in front of the TVs, because we need united society, which efforts and all the thoughts would be directed in one thing: how to win the war. So these are the examples that I think...
Have any of these measures been too extreme? Are there any... Maybe you can't share that with us because it's a touchy topic, but...
I think, so I am uncomfortable to say it, right? Because it's in a way I confess. I think there were a number of extreme things, and you can see it and you can read it in media. In a way, at the same time, we kind of, you have this also, it's a mode of reconciling with it, that we say, okay, we forgive it or we take it as a granted during the war. But as soon as the war over, we demand all the rights, all the democratic rules to come back in place. And I think that our political leadership and the political forces and journalists understand it very, very well. So there is like a tacit agreement in the society that the war is our first effort and we need to survive. So we sacrifice a number of the things that would be unthought of in a democratic society here in Iceland. But this is something needed to continue the fight.
Okay, let's change the topic a little bit. You spoke about support, getting the support from the international community and, for example, the support that Iceland has shown Ukraine. Ambassador, it is often claimed that Ukraine's fight for their independence and freedom is also our democratic fight, will fight for our democratic values and freedoms. Do you feel that Europeans and allies across the Atlantic living far away from the front lines of war are aware of that or even agree with it?
Well, first of all, let me, if you allow me, I want to thank Svitlana for her introduction and for the presentation that she gave, which I found an extremely powerful way of explaining to us here in this peaceful country about the realities that the Ukrainian people are living with. She has a 15-month-old baby back home in Kyiv, born after the full-scale invasion. There are missiles flying over their heads, aimed at trying to kill people like Svitlana and her child. This is the reality, and you have put this in context. Let's remind ourselves, when things started to unfold in Ukraine 10 years, 12 years ago, in 2013, 14, the Ukrainian people were on a path. They wanted to become a stronger European democratic country. We had the events of Maidan happening because Ukraine wanted to come closer and sign an agreement with the European Union. They wanted a European path, become a part of the European family. Now, our support, do we realize, I think, again, what was said here earlier is something which really helps us to realize that that this and get a feeling for the big picture. That can we take this piece, which is we feel to be present here in this country, for example, is it real or not? We cannot take anything for granted. Of course, Iceland is in the middle of the North Atlantic. We are a part of the European family. We are a member of NATO. Our allies that are very close to the borders with Russia feel this every single day. Our Baltic neighbors, because they are our close neighbors and close partners, they feel this threat. We are, of course, further away. I think there is difference between different European countries. I have spent 5 years myself in NATO. I know about the conversations that take place there. There are obviously different views in different countries about the threat, but it's clear that Russia is the biggest threat to peace and security on the European continent.
When you are, visiting countries like Iceland and telling your story, I imagine you get a lot of empathy and support. But do you feel like, those of us who are living very far away from the actual war agree or understand what might be at stake?
So I want to tell you first that when I came here on Iceland and when you go out from the airport, the first kind of stand you meet, to my surprise, it was in Ukrainian language, like a welcome for Ukrainian citizens. And this is one of the policies of your government. You have 4,000 Ukrainians now as refugees living here on your island, which is very much appreciated. But I also talked to some people in this room, and they told me that, the war is already more than 2 years, and lasts more than 2 years, and people are getting tired, not only Ukraine, but also international community, to hear about it all the time. And this is kind of reality, that there is less assistance, there is less emotions, there is less just empathy, because we are human beings. We cannot, function on grievance all the time, which is understandable. So on the one hand, I have to admit that we are extremely grateful to your country, to your people that are so informed and so empathetic. At the same time, we feel that this mode of support is getting weaker, unfortunately, also with other conflicts in the world, with other horrible, brutal wars that are happening, which is understandable. But, the war is still there. And more than empathy and more than understanding, we need decisive actions to stop it. And as I said in my presentation, it demands a very hard decision-making, because there is no way just to put us around the table and say, okay, Ukraine and Russia, you lost so many people, let's now find the solution. There was a security gap in Europe. There was the previous speaker, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce, sorry about your name, I'll learn it. But you were talking about the end of the Cold War, and yes, I believe that after the end of the Cold War, there was some major decisions about the NATO and EU to accept Central European, Eastern European countries in its backyard, to say that this is a strategic territories that we will protect with our umbrella, because they are democratic, they are European, they belong to European community, and you as authoritarian regimes, please don't even look in that direction. That's kind of course, I'm simplifying, but that was the policies that were there. This is exactly the policy, and this is the strategic gap that I was talking about, that when in 2000, after Georgia Rose Revolution, after Ukraine became and had this aspiration and people chose to become EU members and NATO members, there had to be a strategic decision-making on give that opportunity and accept those candidates to the European community. And I believe it could have been done.
Thank you. Ambassador, what kind of diplomatic role can small nations like Iceland play in contributing to peace efforts in the Eastern region or in general, globally? It's a very big question.
That's a big question. That's a big question. Well, Iceland has a voice. Iceland has a voice. We are, of course, a small country, small nation, with a small foreign service. I would want this foreign service to be bigger. But we try as best as we can to use our voice. And I think our current foreign minister has spoken very clearly about the importance of international law, the rules-based international order, about human rights, and tried to explain that both abroad and also in the conversation we have in Iceland, how important this is. We are not neutral on this in this particular case when it comes to what is happening in Ukraine. Iceland has taken a very clear stand on this war. This is an illegal, unprovoked war against a peaceful neighbor, which is unacceptable. One thing is, for example, a conflict, a war like in Ukraine. Another thing are various conflicts around the world where I think Iceland can use its voice. But I have to be reasonable also and realize that there are other nations, and I think this is something which is going to be discussed in more detail later this morning and this afternoon about conflict resolution and peace building. This is something which countries have to invest in this, and many countries around the world have done it. Some of the Nordic countries have done it and done it well. You need to have experts, you need to have expertise, and you need to have the capacity. So I have to be realistic what Iceland can do. Iceland speaks about peace. We are very clear that we want a peaceful world and everybody can live in dignity. So I therefore think we have a credibility, and we are of course always ready and willing to help if peace building is possible.
Yeah. Svitlana, I'm going to go straight to you.
Yes.
Trust is a key element in peace building, and we all here know that peace building is a very difficult and tricky process. But in your opinion, how can we restore trust between nations that have been torn apart, like Ukraine and Russia have been, and by war and misinformation? Do you see that happening?
I think that one day it will happen, of course, but it will take generation to restore the trust. The more important question on the agenda is to restore the peace. Restore the peace would not restore the trust, but it would keep people alive. And that's our main goal that we have to achieve on the table. I want to say something, like following what Ambassador said. We are probably all students, like metaphorically, of this linear history, that like Francis Fukuyama, one of the scientists from Stanford University, he wrote this book, The End of the History, implying that after the end of the Cold War, we will be all one day liberal democracies in the world. So we see that after the World War II, there was this direction into the disarmament and non-proliferation of the weapon around the world. And more democracies, significantly more democracies, and more human rights and life have never been better than now, in a way, But we also see that maybe we shouldn't perceive this history in a linear way. And the rise of the authoritarian regimes should not be considered as something situational and something that exists somewhere else. In my mind, and we've learned it in Ukraine, that global world is a global village, and you can feel yourself secure even if you don't threat anyone and you're a small country. The danger is there because there are strong dictators with a lot of power, with a lot of force, with very strong armies. And we cannot protect ourselves just continuing living in this paradigm of that linear history dictates us that we will increase our democratic policies and make it more we will follow the diversity and many other important values and important topics, but this is not enough. I think that this history, in a way, brings us back, makes us to face the reality that actually it's again a time when we have to think about the weapon. However disappointing it is, but it's not the weapon that we should use to fight. This is the weapon we should have in order, just in case, to prevent the wars. That's my changed mindset after the war that we experience in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Can I follow up on, it was mentioned by my colleague Bertis about the multilateral system, which is of course fundamental for the world that we live in. We have the United Nations, we have many other international organizations, most of them created following the Second World War or at the end of the Second World War. We have to do whatever we can to try to preserve this system as far as I see. I mean, we have to realize that there are strong elements globally that want to undermine this system. And we have to find a way to preserve it. I think one issue related to the war in Ukraine is the dialogue between Western countries and the South, the global South, as it is sometimes referred to. We need to strengthen this. We need to find a way to cooperate better together. It is the interest of the entire world community that the rules-based international system is preserved, absolutely.
Is that just very quickly, because I'm going to check if the audience has any questions. Yes, do we have a microphone? Thank you.
Доброго ранку, Svitlana.
Добрий ранок.
I have one question. My name is Christopher Kristinsson, Director Support for Ukraine, Iceland. When you see the compromise for the finish in the war, because like the war the starting in the February 2022, the Russians say this is no war, this is the special operation. And we don't see this is the very big false. This is no regular the war. This is the genocide in the Ukraine. I remember very well, like it's the Russians, the broken the memorandum in the Budapest. I mean, this is very important point here. And when you see the compromise for the finish this genocide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning Budapest Memorandum. For those who doesn't know, Ukraine was one of the holders of the nuclear weapon in 1994. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we were one of the biggest holders of nuclear weapon in the world. Budapest Memorandum, in accordance with the Budapest Memorandum, we gave up on it. We voluntarily disarmed ourselves in exchange for security guarantees from US, from UK, from Russia. And of course, when the war came to our land, this Budapest Memorandum didn't mean anything. So it's another, unfortunately, disappointment of ours on the international agreements, multilateral platforms, and so on. But talking about the compromise, and since I don't have a mandate actually to talk about it, right? And I'm speaking here not just in my own capacity, but I'm an advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister of European Integration. So I will not articulate the compromise because it can be misinterpreted by media, and I wouldn't do that. But I will tell you that what is important for Ukrainians, and I will articulate probably one of the biggest expectations, anticipations of Ukrainians. We want our sovereignty. We want to become EU member. We want to become NATO member. We have all the grounds to do so, and we want to have this better future in this European and Euro-Atlantic community. And that would be the main goal for us. And the end of the war, which would allow us to do that, would be something that Ukrainians would consider as a fair end of the war.
Do we have any other questions? Where's the microphone? Please.
Thank you so much for a very powerful keynote. My name is Turin Tryggestand. I'm from the Peace Research Institute in Oslo and also representing the Nordic Women Mediators. I was wondering if you maybe could say a few words about the role of women in Ukraine in the resistance. I'm not only thinking militarily, but also in civilian capacities. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. So when I was Member of Parliament elected in 2014, we were only 12% of women in the Parliament. We have a Parliament of 450 people. Already in 2019, when I lost my seat, which is the nature of politics, we had already 25% of women in the politics, which I believe is a fantastic increase of and empowerment of women in Ukraine. I was one of those people in the parliament who was working on the gender equality policies, and I was happy that it brought some fruits on the ground. Now also I want to say that we have many women in the government, and they play an important role. As my boss, Deputy Prime Minister of European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, she's a woman. She's now in US, participates in some talks on our victory plan or peaceful agreement, whatever. And also you see that after the war, women actually took a much more powerful role in many dimensions in Ukraine. When it comes to politics, economy, business, just volunteer work, even participation in army. There are more than 10,000 women soldiers play their role as members of the Ukrainian armed forces. So, it's growing. It's not there yet to say that it's equal like in many other countries in the world, but I think that Ukraine made a huge leap in that direction. And despite the war, or maybe because of the war, the role of women only has enhanced.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, gentlemen. I don't know how strict we are on time, but you will just have to wave me down.
My name is Ólafur Egilsson, former diplomat, first ambassador of Iceland to the Ukraine. My question is, why do you think the Minsk agreements failed to avoid crisis in the Ukraine?
Thank you, Ambassador, for this question. The Minsk agreement in the first place was not fair, not legitimate, and not really supported by Ukrainians. So Russia attacked Ukraine, let me just remind you, not in 2022, but in 2014. They occupied part of Donbass and Lugansk region, and they annexed Crimean territory. Minsk agreement didn't answer those fair questions of Ukrainians of why do we have to give up on our land? Why do we have to introduce the autonomy fully controlled by Russia on Ukrainian territory, which would have a voice in our foreign policy, and which would be an enclave inside our country, which would block the development of policies overall and development of our country. Why do we have to introduce Russian language as a state language under the dictated by another country? And please don't take me wrong, I'm bilingual. Russian language is my maternity language, one of them, and my grandmother was Russian, and my grandmother was a teacher of Russian language. But it's not about that. This war is about identity. I don't want to be run by a post-Soviet dictator. Post-Soviet dictator does not have to tell me which language should I speak. Ukrainians chose to be an independent, sovereign country. We want to be a democratic state without corruption. We want to become a European member and a NATO member. And Putin didn't want it. Why? Because it's a danger to him personally. Having a democratic state, such a big state, such a close state historically to Russia, would mean that Putin will lose his power, that he can be killed, he can be ousted from the country. He saw how it happened in Ukraine, how a post-Soviet country transformed itself into a completely European state. So he was just frightened that it's going to happen to him as well. That's partially why this attack took place. So Minsk agreement didn't contain the fair conditions to end the war that started in 2014. Thank you.
We have officially run out of time, but I wanted to ask you, do you have any final words, Ambassador? Very briefly, is there some things that we need to change in our diplomacy methods, or another big question, but any words of wisdom before we say goodbye?
Maybe just brief final thoughts. I want to state it clearly that what Ukraine deserves is just and lasting peace. Just and lasting peace, which means, number one, international law will apply, and secondly, that whatever peace agreement might be signed is something which will hold. The Budapest Memorandum was mentioned. It must be something which is going to last. I think maybe to throw in as a conversation subject for other sessions later today is for this group of people to have in-depth discussions about the different elements of what are the tools that we have. Of course, diplomacy, I would always put diplomacy number one. We need to be able to speak, and sometimes we do need to have to speak with those that we don't like. How do we get there, and how do we make that a fruitful conversation? That's one thing. We do stand in solidarity with Ukraine. I want to say it clearly here. I'm proud to be sitting next to Svitlana and hear her strong words. But there must be also accountability. Another subject for conversation, I think, is so how do you have a just and lasting peace, and those perpetrators that have committed war crimes are held accountable? Iceland has been instrumental on what is called the Register of Damage, which was initiated at the summit of the Council of Europe here in Reykjavik last year. There is discussion, very complicated discussions about international tribunal, so on and so forth. There is question about the incentives, the carrots and the sticks. I think also something for you to discuss. I had an interesting conversation last night with one colleague on the sanctions. We got a clear message from Svitlana on the sanctions. Iceland is fully participating in those. She is asking for more. I think that's also a topic for those who want to build peace. What role do sanctions play, so on and so forth. So there are many, many issues to discuss as far as I see.
Thank you. Very briefly, any final words?
I want to say just one thing. Thank you for everyone and each of you who are helping us. Thank you very much.
Thank you both.